What are the social benefits of being vaccinated twice?
I think they give you huge protection, gives people confidence, and also I think it protects other people from being infected. So there are huge benefits from two vaccinations, absolutely.
Yeah, but what about the social benefits? I'm thinking particularly about, I'm looking at the figures, 0.4% of travellers that have come back from amber-listed countries have tested positive. That's 89 people out of more than almost 23,500. People who've had two vaccines, should they have to quarantine on their return from holiday?
So the figures that you quote, I think, were stated in the Times today. And those figures don't tell the full picture. Yes, they are statistics. They're very encouraging. But you can appreciate that we want to keep people as safe as possible. And that's why we've maintained the amber list.
But do you acknowledge that people who are having two jabs are getting more and more frustrated thinking, OK, I'm protecting other people, but there have to be some other social benefits for me, whether that means I don't have to quarantine if I go on holiday, or if I come into contact with somebody who's had COVID, I don't have to self-isolate, which is in fact what Matt Hancock is suggesting, isn't it?
So I totally get the frustration. I mean, for me, it's been very difficult because I want to go on holiday, but I've chosen not to because of the restrictions, the guidelines. I think it's a difficult one to balance. It's encouraging, as you say, the data we've seen from amber list countries, but at the moment, we want to take an approach that's more safer rather than sorry.
And what about, as I said, developing from Matt Hancock's wanting to ditch the stay-at-home order for people who have come in contact with people who have COVID if they've had two jabs?
Yeah, I think Matt is clearly very close to the information. He's worked extremely hard over more than a year now. And what he says, there's a lot of force to what he says. I don't know what the final decision will be, but as we've always done through this process, we've been more cautious, perhaps, than a lot of people would have liked. But of course, we've got a duty to keep people safe.
More cautious than perhaps you would have liked, but I'm sure you saw the scenes in Leicester Square with the football, the Scotland fans at the weekend. No social distancing there at all. What's the government's view on that?
I think it's really difficult because we want people to act responsibly. And I saw the pictures as well. I think it's really concerning that lots of people were congregating in this way. But it's a very difficult thing to police. I mean, I saw the game, as I think you did.
It was rubbish.
It was a rubbish game, but that's...
Not if you're a Scotland fan, obviously. Good morning, everyone in Scotland. If you're an England fan, maybe not so much.
Putting the quality of the football to one side, I think, yeah, it is a problem. But again, we've got to strike that balance between essentially compelling people how to behave and then giving guidelines so that people can act sensibly. In this instance, it was very concerning, the behaviour.
But you can appreciate the frustration then of the nighttime industry, nightclub owners, people who... We've got someone on later on who has 6 theatres in the West End, and they're not allowed to play at full capacity.
I get their frustrations. I mean, as you said, I'm the business secretary. Well, what we're going to do is we set out a roadmap, and hopefully on the 19th of July, everything can revert back to some type of normality.
Could it be before the 19th of July?
I think between you and me, I would always err on the side of caution, and I would look to the 19th of July. It could be before, but I think that's unlikely.
Do you?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's just my guess. Generally, we've stuck to the dates that we've said. I remember in the previous dates, there was a lot of push to try and get the dates, the 12th of April earlier, the 17th of May earlier. That didn't happen. And I think now I'm very focused on the 19th of July.
OK, the reason I'm slightly pressing you on that is because there has been criticism of the Prime Minister this morning that he doesn't throw his net wide enough to ask his ministers and cabinet ministers permission. He just relies on a core group of ministers. And from what you're saying, it does sound as though he doesn't reach out to people like you and say...
He does.
So what's he saying about the 19th of July?
So you'll appreciate that today's the 21st, so the 19th is 4 weeks' time. And all through this process, we've said that we would take the decision a week before the actual date because the data's moving around all the time.
But you appreciate how frustrating that is for the nighttime industry that we've just talked about, trying to organise reopening.
I fully appreciate that. But, Kay, you'll know that the coronavirus is quite unpredictable. We don't know where it'll be even in 2 weeks' time, let alone 4 weeks' time. And what the Prime Minister's always said is that we've got to look at the data in real time. We've got to look at the data as it comes, and then make a judgment soon in between the dates. That means that we've got to look at the data, and we can't make a decision a month or 5 weeks before the actual day.
what we do know is it's costing us a fortune, this pandemic. How are we going to pay for it?
I think it's a very difficult question to answer. I'm hopeful, as Business Secretary, as you can imagine, that we can grow the economy. And that's, in the past, has always been the best way to raise tax revenue, to grow an economy, have a prosperous economy. And then the tax revenue from a thriving economy can pay down some of the debt. That's what's happened in the past, happened after the Second World War.
But this is a massive debt, isn't it?
No, well, the Second World War was a huge debt.
The suggestion is that it's going to be a pension raid. That's flying a kite in the papers this morning, the Telegraph particularly.
I don't think, I mean, obviously we're discussing, lots of things are being discussed in government, but I don't think that that's necessarily the way forward.
So you think a triple lock will stay in place as far as
I'm pretty sure
the
triple lock, obviously it's a decision for the Chancellor, but I'm pretty sure the triple lock will stay.
Talk to me about by-elections. You got an absolute kicking last week. We, for all sorts of reasons, Batley and Spen is looming on the horizon. We heard the former Speaker speaking yesterday, right. John Bercow, here on Sky, actually, suggesting that the Prime Minister only has a nodding acquaintance with the truth. Labour are pressing hard for a planning debate. Planning was a big issue as far as Batley and as far as Amersham was concerned. Wow. How anxious are you about the 1st of July? Because if you lose another one, it's a lot of trouble. Look,
by-elections are always difficult. I mean, you and I remember by-elections were always challenging, have always been challenging for governments. In fact, it's very unusual for a sitting government to win a seat off the opposition, as happened in Hartlepool 6 weeks ago. So by-elections are difficult. I think it was a very disappointing result last week in Chesham and Amersham. And we're looking to learn lessons from that. Anyone would try and learn lessons from what was a very difficult set of results.
But you're not a government that's used to losing. You seem to have been doing very well of late in previous elections. Is it down to planning and the issues that we saw there in Amersham, or is it a bigger problem for you? Are you concentrating too much on the red wall and ignoring the blue wall?
I don't think that's true. I mean, I think, as you know, by-elections are always a mixture of national issues and local issues. I think last week in Chesham and Amersham, the local issues played quite strongly. There was a lot of talk about HS2. There was a lot of talk about the government. People saying the government wasn't listening on planning. We are listening. We want to engage with our MPs. I have a southern seat as well, where this is a big issue, and we want to engage. Now, about winning elections, yes, it's nice to win elections, but generally, as you remember, governments tend to lose by-elections in midterm. I mean, that's what has happened historically. I think we've had a good run, but we're not taking anything for granted. I think the election next week will be very difficult for us. It's a historic Labour seat. But we will try our best to win it.
So from what you're saying, it sounds as though you're setting yourself up for failure.
No, not at all. I mean, I'm very realistic, and I look back at lots of midterm results which have been very disappointing in government for years. And I think it would be foolish for us to expect a miraculous, a really good win. I think we've got to just try and work hard for every vote, be humble in the face of the voters, and see if we can get a result. I'm not underestimating how difficult Batley and Spen will be.
Where are we on the Prime Minister's credibility, though? We talked about the former Speaker there saying that, you know, he sees the truth maybe once every leap year. And then we've seen Dominic Cummings absolutely ripping him to bits. He's going to do it again later on today. He's going to have a live Q&A session. How much damage are noises off doing the Prime Minister?
I think the Prime Minister, and what is his great strength, is that he's very, very focused on the job at hand. He's very, very focused on providing leadership. And as you say, a lot of people recognise that. That's why we've had successful results in places like Hartlepool, which was historically unprecedented. And he's very focused. People say all sorts of things about Prime Ministers from time to time. Sometimes they say bad things. But that won't detract from the Prime Minister's focus on what is a very difficult situation.
But when they impact on his credibility, that's when it starts to damage the party. That's when it starts to damage the government.
Well, I don't think they have necessarily impacted on his credibility. I mean, I've been reading about Boris Johnson for 30 years. People have said all sorts of things about him in the past. And nothing,
Isn't Prime Minister.
Nothing has really detracted from his focus on the job. You'll remember, he's done the job for nearly 2 years now. And that whole period before the general election in December 2019, there are all sorts of things being written about the Prime Minister, being written about the party, being written about the fact that, you know, we took the whip off people and all that sort of thing. But we were very focused. The Prime Minister was extremely focused on getting a mandate, on the election. And he remains very focused on levelling up and driving his agenda.
So people like Dominic Cummings and people like what's Bercow's first name? I've completely John Bercow. There you go. Are to be ignored.
Well, I think they can say what they say in the media, but our job as ministers and the Prime Minister's job is to focus on getting us out of a very difficult situation with COVID. That's 100% of our focus at the moment.
And we care not a jot what people like that think.
Well, I read in the papers and I might form my own judgments, but I'm 100% focused on the job. OK.
We also read in the papers about a royal yacht. Really? He wants to spend £200 million on it, the Prime Minister. Apparently, the royal family don't want it. And the Treasury, the MOD and the Cabinet Office are all refusing to pay for it. Everybody's falling out. Nobody wants this royal yacht. Why does he want one?
I think there's a discussion in government about the yacht. I'm not sure any conclusions have been reached. And there's a degree of agreement. I mean, I'm speaking to colleagues and we're trying to mull over those issues. But I think it's a good idea, actually.
Why do you think it's a good idea?
Because actually what it does is that it represents Britain, it's a symbol of Britain, and if we're going on trade missions, that's exactly the way that we would drive trade, and it's a symbol of Britain. I'm sure it'll get much more bang, we'll get much more bang for our buck from something like that than the opposite.
But if the royals don't want it, who's going to be at it? Is it just going to be you and Boris?
It's not going to be it's not just going to be me. I'm not that big. I can't fill the
seriously,
place.
£2 million quid at the moment.
Well, we do have trade delegations. We have people representing the country to try and get really good deals. Liz Truss, my colleague, is doing a fabulous job in that regard. And that sort of thing is something that can drive trade as a symbol of the...
But you can see how it might be ridiculed by voters in Batley and Spen when they're struggling to feed their kids at the moment, and we're talking about spending £200 million on a yacht that the royals don't want. It's
a huge amount of money, but then it would only be the decision to spend that money would only be made if we felt that we could get a return from something as symbolic as that, and it would be something which would really enhance what we call our soft power, in terms of doing deals.
So it's not a decision that's going to be made anytime soon?
Well, it's something that's being discussed. I can't tell you when exactly the decision will be made.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Thank you, really appreciate it.